All right, everyone, the ACLU has decided to side with the Harvard University over Asian students that are attending there who claim that they've been discriminated against on entrance exam scores and things like that by Harvard based on the fact that they're Asian. Now, this is definitely true. There is an objective truth here. The objective truth is that Harvard looks at the race of a person when they apply and lets them in and gives them access to, I guess, financial aid or whatever, based in part on their skin color, based in part on their ethnic origin. For instance, if a person is black or Native American, their score, whatever it is, they add a little bit to it before considering it. If they're Asian or white, they demote it a little bit, Asians especially. That's based on the statistical reality that has to do with test scores, that different groups of people are at different levels as an aggregate. Now, I look at individuals. There are people who are dumber than a box of rocks in every racial group. There are people that are geniuses in every racial group. I'm talking about the statistical average within test scores here, which is something you're not really supposed to even bring up. Like, I'm surprised that the ACLU has no problem with the fact that that's the basis for Harvard's enrollment policies, when if you or I talk about these same statistics, we get called a racist. You also get called a racist if you point out, hey, affirmative action is indeed demoting, directly and explicitly demoting the test scores of some people that are applying to these universities, it's not just Harvard, based on the fact of their ethnicity. I'm uncomfortable with that. I would say, here's an interesting scenario. Let's say that you have, because specifically, Harvard excuses these policies on the basis of historical discrimination. Now, of course, Asians were discriminated against who? Ever hear of an internment camp? Yeah, you don't want to talk about that because it involves your savior, your socialist messiah, FDR. I've spoken about how bitter a cripple he was before. Here's the fact. You look at this situation. Let's say that you have a white person trying to get into Harvard. Their parents dropped out middle school and eloped when they were fucking 14. They're a child of their mother at 16, basically. Their dad doesn't have any teeth. Fucking, I know this is a little stereotypical, but just imagine living in a slum. Living in one of those places that Obama ignored that the recovery never went back to. Somewhere in the middle of the Rust Belt or Lower Appalachia or something, there's a family with a dirt floor and they heat their house with wood and they don't have an education. Their kid's tries to study, book smart, that kid ain't right, basically. Manages to get really good scores, potentially first in the family to go to college, applies to Harvard. They're a fucking genius. They're the Appalachian fucking Einstein or Tesla. And they apply. Now you have some kid, they happen to be black or Native American, and they're of similar aptitude. They come from a family where both their parents have PhDs, they get to go to school in a limo, basically. Their parents are rich. Their parents are extremely intelligent. Everyone in their family for 3 generations is a fucking rocket scientist or something. Which one of these students do you think gets preference on Harvard's enrollment? Yeah, therein lies the problem. It's based solely on race without even a tip of the hat to any other individual circumstances. That's discriminatory. And by the way, doesn't Harvard take some public funding? Don't they get some money from the government? It's different. If you have a private university, if it's a completely private school, I don't care how much they discriminate. But when you have public edifices, as many are, it's like I went to UVM. UVM's called, for better or worse, Public Ivy. What that really means is there are a lot of Marxists on the campus and bullshit like that more than anything else. I liked Castleton more. Castleton's now a university too. I went there. But I'm going to UVM. It's public. It gets public funding. If they are getting so much as a penny of public funding, there shouldn't be one inkling of affirmative action involved, because taxpayer money is going into the system there. It's essentially public education for all intents and purposes. Therefore, it should be restrained from making any sweeping political statements. I would say it's very political to suggest that people should be treated differently based on their race. You know what you sound like? You sound like maybe a segregationist or something. Affirmative action just perpetuates the same bullshit that's been going on. By creating inequality, structural inequality within a system, you're not actually... the idea, by the way, it will pass away in due time. I'll tell you why. People are going to wise up to the fact that creating a layer of inequality in order to negate a former layer of inequality doesn't work because generations shift. Essentially, those that lived under slavery and shit, they're all dead. Those that live under segregation, for the most part at this point, they're old or they're dead. Most people alive today don't date to that time period. Instead, they're in a time period where the inequality has simply been inverted and aimed against people who are white, and in the case of Harvard, against people who happen to be of Asian ancestry. So you're telling me that some kid whose family just immigrated from Japan or something, legal immigrants, they're the first generation to actually be born in the United States, they're applying for college, and Harvard's going to tell them, sorry, we don't have a spot for you. We had to let somebody else in. Your scores weren't high enough. Oh, but my scores were literally perfect. Yeah, sorry. They had to be higher than perfect because of the people that enrolled this year. Yeah, that's discriminatory. Now, the ACLU is saying, well, this might benefit whites mostly. That's a problem. I would ask the ACLU, what problem do you have with white people? You shouldn't have any problem with anyone. You're the ACLU. It used to be. The ACLU spent, when I was a kid, its time fighting against the Bush administration's police state bullshit, trying to conduct surveillance and stuff. An equal opportunity issue. An issue where anyone, it doesn't matter what color you are, you can be abused, by the government. Now it just wants to fight on behalf of discrimination. It's actually kind of weird to see, because after, a decade and a half, you're talking about, I'm standing mainly against evangelocons at the time. The Bushes and people like him wanted to fuck around and themselves be discriminatory. Religious extremism and all sorts of weird shit like that. Traditionalism, applied to the legal system as opposed to just, hey, I happen to have such moral views. They attempted to codify it to pacify evangelical voters. Bush himself, not a religious man. Don't get me fucking started on that. War and surveillance, the police state, stuff like that. The ACLU stood against it. And I was on that side. Fairly recently, though, in the wake of Trump being elected, they've decided, hey, so hashtag me too. Oh, Brett Kavanaugh there's an allegation against him? Well, we stand against his confirmation. Why? Because we no longer want to defend people against false claims or against government intrusion or against, the intel agencies. We're all on board with that, so long as the person that's being targeted has an R after their name or whatever, I guess. The ACLU has really devolved. So I thought it was surreal. They come out and tweet, we stand opposed, we side with Harvard because the Asian students, if the decision goes for the Asian students that are suing them, it'll only benefit white people. I'm asking myself, why does that matter? Why does it matter? Affirmative action should not exist. It's discriminatory in the most literal sense. Shouldn't exist in any way, shape, or form. It's a basically stupid idea. Basically, within government, there shouldn't be any form of discrimination. It's just like with gay marriage. With gay rights and stuff. The government itself, the federal government, was muzzled from discriminating based on such characteristics long before private entities. That's because it's more cut and dry. Well, you've got all of these schools in the country that take taxpayer money, or they partner with political movements in some way or form. They should be restrained from adopting affirmative action. It is a discriminatory policy. This is being argued by the Asian Students' Union, I believe. And they're right. It's documented. It's on paper. It's codified. Harvard literally discriminates against Asian applicants. They also discriminate against white and Jewish applicants. But of course, if a bunch of white people were to say they were being discriminated against, they get called Nazis probably. This has become a problem for the Democrats, just like with Farrakhan's video there. It's become a problem where they can't call Farrakhan racist. It's impossible because they've convinced people that's impossible because he happens to be African American. It's very, very funny indeed. That's about all. Peace out.